Hello, and welcome to Strategic Mental Health. I'm Carissa Bone, a licensed professional counselor with over 25 years experience across various professional disciplines. Now, on my last video, we talked about automatic thoughts and how, although they are very powerful and inform so much of what we think and what we do, basically how we show up in the world, they lie within our subconscious mind. That means that we are often not actively aware that the thought is in fact influencing how we show up in that way. So then, what influences or determines those automatic thoughts? If they are in our subconscious mind, which 99.0% of our thoughts are, how do we truly proactively and preventatively manage that? Well, I have a few tips for you today as we begin our conversation at Strategic Mental Health Services. Now, before we begin, I want to remind you that everything we discuss today is informative. It's just information. It's education for entertainment purposes, not for clinical or medical advice. Having said that, I want to talk to you about what really and truly informs those automatic thoughts we say. Well, have you ever heard the thought, the concept, the idea that we are what we eat, right? So physically, what we consume, what we eat, what we drink, it becomes literally the makeup of who we are, how well our body functions, how we look, pretty much how we show up in the world physically. Well, guess what? The same is true in our psychological health. What we consume that informs our thoughts actually informs how we show up. What do you mean, Carissa? What I'm saying is, what we take in, what we learn, what we consume, what we see, what we say, what we hear, what we repeat, what we engage in as far as information is concerned, truly informs what we think, how we act, and of course, how we feel. Whether it is intentional or unintentional, whether it is through passive observation or active engagement. For example, when you are, let's say, preparing for a test, what do you do to learn that information? You often review it, you rehearse it, you repetitively engage with that information over and over until you've learned it and can apply it effectively, intentionally, specifically. The same thing is true even if it is unintentional. So let's say that you scroll through social media. By the way, about 3 hours per day is the average length of time that any person spends engaging in social media and on the internet. So I want you to think about today, just today, what have you taken a look at on various internet social media platforms? Think about it. Funny, maybe serious, maybe super intense, or maybe it's not something you saw on social media. Maybe you were just kind of flipping through the channels and there was a news broadcast on, or maybe a movie. All of that is information. And the more that you are exposed to information, especially when it's repeatedly so, the more your mind absorbs it. And that absorption of information becomes a part of your automatic thoughts. That's right. You get a piece of information, you review it, you laugh about it, and then you go and you talk about what was funny with one person, and then, oh, by the way, you're talking with another friend and you remind yourself and remind them how funny it was. Or maybe it wasn't so funny. and you have a serious conversation about how appalled, how you can't believe that happened, or that was written, or that you saw that. All of those are examples of repeating the information, repeatedly exposure in different forms, and it begins to become learned. And automatically, the lens through which you see, the framework through which you respond, is directly related to what you saw scrolling through social media, or what you observed on a quick news clip, and then repeated in a conversation or responded to, maybe even with a post. The more attention, whether active or passive, you give to that information, the more exposure you have to it, the more learned or permanent it becomes within your, what we call, cognitive construct. Simply put, that's the lens through which you perceive, or the framework through which you respond or engage with information and others around you. Have you ever wondered, when you see someone, what is it that automatically you begin to size them up and make snap judgments when you haven't met them? It's because of information you have received, absorbed, been exposed to, engaged with in the past, and they are showing some of those attributes. Maybe they have some of the behaviors that you've observed similarly. So that's the type of thing that leads to what we call implicit bias, unconscious bias. But the idea is they're all a function of information. So Carissa, you might say, what's the proactive preventative step I can take here? Here it is. I'm so glad you asked. It's simply to be intentional about what you consume. So instead of sort of leisurely scrolling through or engaging in consumption of information, have intentionality about what you give your eyes, what you give your mind, what you give your energy, your thought processes to. It's really as simple as that. When you begin to consume information, it becomes a part of you. And the more often you consume it, even if it's in different forms and fashions, the more ingrained or the more well learned it is. And so what I'm saying to you is that beginning today, you can determine the power and the content of your automatic thinking by intentionally and proactively determining what you consume intellectually, what you listen to, what you read, what you talk about. Remember, repeated exposure and then repetition to others. Internalizing, externalizing, that exchange of information. Let's say you just decide that you want to have a more positive attitude about X. So what you can begin to do is to find information that in fact is positive about X and intentionally consume that information. Read that information. Listen to podcasts about that information. Listen to audiobooks about that information. Engage with others in conversation about that information, the positive aspects of it. And you will begin to change the rhythm, the pattern, the construct of that thing, such that your automatic thoughts will become positive based on the information and the exchange of information you've had. And you will, here's the thing, even begin to feel, F-E-E-L, differently. Not only will you think differently and speak differently, act differently, but you will feel differently. So I want you to think in your mind right now, what is it that you want to think differently about? And how would you like to think differently about it? Seek out information that is how and what you want to think. Consume that information intentionally every day. 15 minutes. And let me know how it goes. Those automatic thoughts, they'll still be automatic. Automatically informed by your intentional consumption of information. I'm Carissa Bone, and I hope to see you right here on this channel very soon. Take care.